All right. Well, this is the third session for Nouns Coding Club. We've been looking at frames recently. Session 2 was a bit more of a debugging session, getting into the nitty-gritty, really kind of understanding and exploring what we were dealing with. This time, we'll put all that together and work on a interactive frame where you have buttons that based on whatever button you press, you can respond with different content. That's kind of the idea behind a lot of frames that exist. Is you basically just click a button and get a response, and whatever that button was supposed to do, it does. So what we have here is, let me go ahead and share my screen. This is what we're working toward. Let's see, I guess I'll do my entire screen as usual. All right. There that is. Cool. So this is what we're working on, is the frame validator. Just want to take my currently deployed frame, which I have verified works ahead of time. Need the full link. I'll just go enable clipboard here. There we go. Hit the refresh. And so it's the same image we started out with, because I think it's funny at this point. And then we have the 4 buttons. So where we left it last time, we didn't have any buttons. We couldn't get them to display. Couldn't figure out how to do different stuff based on different buttons that we pressed. And yeah, all that's been rectified at this point. So we have our default image that loads in with our frame. We have button 1, and our developer tooling here is kind of showing us how long it took for our frame to fetch initially, and then how long it took for us to respond to that. So we have button 1, button 2. It's just kind of giving us some diagnostic information here. Button 3 and button 4, and you can respond. I've kept it static now, where it's kind of like a specific set number. But we can look at this maybe if we have time. But you could respond with a different set of buttons per frame. But we do have a decent little bit to get through, so maybe we can catch that in the next one. As far as where we ended up with last successful code versus where we're going to be. It's a good bit of shuffling around, so I wanted to just capture the high points, and then we can look at making it a little bit even more dynamic, possibly at the end or maybe in the next one, if no one has any questions or anything. Let's look at the repo first. So you might have some changes that are going on or currently in progress in your current working repository, like the changes that we ended up with. So we're gonna be pulling in, bump this up a little bit. We're gonna be pulling in all of the changes that I made. Yeah, I just pushed a few changes a minute ago. So what you want to do is in your terminal.
Question.
Yes, what's up?
So if I'm a new person and I'm coming in and I'm joining and I'm using the GitHub repository that we used in session 1, and you're saying that there were changes done to the repository. So those are not like, okay, I deployed a frame. Okay, cool. But you made changes to the GitHub repo. Those changes are not automatically updated into my new frame, right? And that's what
no,
that's right now.
That's an excellent question. Yes, so we're working with Git and GitHub in that case. So yeah, your changes, or you won't get my changes until you pull them in.
Okay.
With a command from yeah, and we'll look at that here in just a sec. But yeah, that's totally right. So your work, nothing gets automatically updated. You'll need to actually pull in any of the changes from my repo, and depending on how you did that, you may want to just use the git command. If you're having any trouble with that, you could just go ahead and delete the folder on your computer and start over. All that the state we were in kind of at the end there has been captured, and we're going to walk through going from where that ended off at and where that example we just looked at in the developer tooling is, kind of step by step there. So
okay, and just one more question. Does GitHub have kind of like a notification system set up? So if I used your GitHub repo and say that you did make changes, could I be notified by email or something? Or am I just supposed to just always stay on top of it?
So you can, if you're looking at the screen here, you could start it. I'm not going to start my own repo. That's kind of lame. And watch it. and
Okay.
you can see, you can specify the level of activity you're interested in.
Okay, perfect.
And then if you were so inclined, I guess you could pin it, and that'll actually pin it to your GitHub repo or GitHub profile. Maybe you could show it as something you've worked on. I don't know. Nope.
Okay, perfect. That makes sense.
This got merged. Cool. So yes. It's probably best if you want to just, if this doesn't work, what we'll want to do to pull in the most recent changes in your terminal. Let me bump this up a little bit again. So we'll do git pull. And I'm already up to date, but you guys should get some information saying like incoming files, grab these files, and then did some stuff. If you cloned my repo directly, if you forked it, you may have to do that through the, where did it go here? Through the GitHub interface. I don't think I have any active forks that I'm keeping right now. But essentially, if you fork the repo, it'll tell you that your repo is behind and that you can sync the commits. Yeah, I just don't have any forks that I have on my profile here. But you can also update it that way if you did the forking method. If you don't want to do either of those, you can just clone the repo using Git. That would be my recommendation. If you're having any issues doing git pull, it's not changing your code, it's not updating, or maybe it's not set up correctly, maybe just delete it and then re-download it. It's going to be a good way to kind of get to where we're at right now. So
Okay, perfect.
were you able to pull the changes?
Yes.
Nice. And then now, if you open your VS Code, let me go ahead and set all this up real quick. So yeah, if you pulled in the changes successfully, you'll notice the source directory is a little bit different. We've added a session 3 directory. And this is basically what we're going to be working through. I'm just structuring the repository a little bit better. It's going to kind of be organized around the sessions themselves now, because as SQX pointed out, we'll probably want to do some sort of like time-gated. We were talking about cohorts with projects and things like that. And that'll just help us keep it organized for now. And this will just kind of evolve. I'm just kind of making it up as I go here as far as the sessions and whatnot. But this is where we ended up at with the basic frame just running, not really doing anything special, responding with our static image of the weather in Wyoming. Apparently it was pretty cold whenever we started. So yeah, this isn't terribly interesting, doesn't do anything interesting. It just responds with a static image to the user of your frame. Not interesting at all. So let me go ahead, and if you look at the next file, they're numbered in the correct order that we'll be going. So first thing we want to do is writing this really long just kind of string. It isn't super intuitive. If you've worked with HTML before, this all looks familiar, but it's kind of a pain in the ass to deal with. We don't want that to be the case. We don't want to have to construct this really kind of complicated, very easy to break string in the future. So we're going to move away from this to using, if you're familiar with React, it's not React, but it does utilize the React templating language that looks like regular HTML, and we're going to see that here in a sec. But yeah, it just utilizes, well, it's not quite regular HTML, it's JavaScript HTML kind of, and we'll point out any important differences there, but you can basically think of it as HTML. It's called JSX. So if you ever looked at React code, it's in there. So what we'll do is we'll go to one. So basically some of those changes that happened whenever you pulled in the new files and things from the GitHub repo, basically we just did some configuration updates. You don't really have to worry about that. I did that in the background so we can use this new layout syntax. Instead of using, here we're using c.text, which this is just our server response is really all you need to think about that. So we're moving away from just a strictly text-based response to a more dynamic one that we can write our HTML looking tags in. We'll scroll past this. We'll look at that in just a second. But yeah, we're using the c.render method right here. You can just think of C as your app, and you're telling your app to render this layout. And that is a good segue into our layout here. So this does require, a fair bit, or not a fair bit, but a basic kind of understanding of JavaScript and JavaScript functions and variables. So like pretty intro stuff, but if anyone has any questions, please let me know. What we've done here is define a variable called layout. And I'll just kind of walk through it here piece by piece. And we are using TypeScript. TypeScript is awesome, so you don't shoot yourself in the foot. But if you don't understand the type stuff, that's fine. Just kind of input it for now, and just know that it's holding our hand and make sure that we provide everything that we need to. All right, so in our layout, we're giving an image URL because we could specify any kind of image there as our frame response. And also we can specify our post URL. So what the post URL is, if you remember, let's go back to the docs here. Sorry, I should have these pulled up. Warpcaster. That's the tool. Warpcaster frames. There we go. And then we'll go to the specification. Should probably just bookmark this at this point. So, yeah, this is our post. Where is it? URL. Yeah. So this is our post URL. Basically, this is where these where Farcaster will send the data that's coming across the wire, which we're also going to look at that as well. So basically, we're defining where we want our default frame image to be and where we want Farcaster to send our response, or Warpcaster, excuse me. Probably going to use those incorrectly, but Farcaster and Warpcaster are still the same to me. So, so we're going to specify our default frame image and where we want Warpcaster to send the information whenever we hit a button, basically is how you can think about it, is what the post URL is. So we have this defined here in our layout. This is, again, just a declared variable function that returns to us the HTML, the JSX in this case, but you can think about it as HTML. Now we're not having to do this, really brittle string, assembly. Don't have to do all this boring stuff. It's just really kind of a pain. If you accidentally pulled off this bottom tick right here, it would break it, things like that. So we're moving over to this syntax that's HTML. You just basically write normal HTML and it'll tell you if you can't. And yeah, that's the layout. So we're basically moving from the c.text, where we're just sending the super basic text, where we're telling our app to render this layout. And so these variables we have defined right here with the image URL and post URL, we have to pass those into our layout. They are required. And this makes our layout reusable. Now, what I mean by that is, so we can specify any post URL by having it set up like this. We can specify any post URL and any image URL. So that means we can reuse this component for basically, it's kind of like the foundation for your frame, if you want to think about it that way. It has our content in here, similar to how we did. It's basically just like an updated version of everything we copied over here with the same required information for Warpcaster to render our frame. Yeah, the frame image and the post URL. And with this set up in this way, we can reuse it in multiple places, which we'll actually see towards the end. So that's setting up the layout. It's putting your HTML and some data together for us in a function that we can use. And yeah, that gets us back to where we were functionality-wise, basically the same. We didn't really get any new functionality for this, but we did get a lot of like developer experience is what we call it. Like this is a lot less difficult or a lot less problematic or error prone because again, we're not doing it inside of a string we could very easily break. And yeah, so that's just the initial update to get us using the HTML-like syntax. This is functionally equivalent at this point to where we ended up last time. So yeah, just a little bit of stuff going on behind the scenes. I just wanted to walk into that, kind of intro you into it instead of it just being different on the main page without you understanding why. So we, just to kind of recap, we have our layout, which is the base of our frame and any other frames in the future. And then we're telling our app to render that at our frame, basically. So it's that same static frame that you saw initially, but with with better code to get there. So that's not super exciting, but that does set us up for success in the future. All right, so yeah, that's getting us our developer experience a little bit better. It's always something just kind of as an aside that we want to consider. When we're first getting our feet wet, kind of hacking away, kind of brute forcing it, doing it kind of naively is typically what we call it, is a great way to first get started. But as we saw in our Voldemort session, that's what I'm going to start calling it, session 2. Whenever you start that way and don't really spend time to review the documents and just kind of, fuck around and find out, you spend a lot of time debugging while you're trying to write code. My wife says I'm not a software engineer. I just cuss at my computer a lot and then stuff seems to happen. So yeah, that's very normal. If you get stuck on something, at this point, if you've been typing along or anything, I would advise maybe check your apostrophes and things like that. Check your quotes, make sure you don't have any issues. But if you're just following along, probably not an issue. But that's something that the reason that popped into mind is while I was doing all this, I was fighting some of this stuff, these strings that have to be a very specific way. So yeah, you're going to encounter stuff that you don't know specifically what to do with sometimes. And yeah, we just want to make sure now that we've gotten through our messing around and finding out phase that we're kind of setting ourselves up for success. So that's all that.
Wait, question.
Sure.
If you're using the Visual Studio Code, don't they have like a section where you can like debug or compile or something? I'm not sure what the term is, but it'll tell you if there's any errors in your code.
So the way we're set up, that's a great question. So the way we're set up with TypeScript, your editor knows about TypeScript pretty well. So if you had any errors in your code, it would tell you. I've also specified, we can actually look at it if you like. So in our TypeScript config file, which don't worry about this too much, but I've also specified some correctness stuff for us in here too. Like you can't have any unused variables, which that's just something, if you're going to do that, just comment it out. Things along those lines. So our tool set, our developer tools are actually running in the background and checking correctness for us.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yep. And let's just say, because you can't break anything in the start file, it's basically done at this point. But yeah, if you just say you go into a file and do something dumb, like say, hello world, without anything, it's going to tell you, but we've just, I spent my time making sure there weren't any errors in the code that I was going to be displaying or, going over for you guys. That got us to our layout update. Again, developer experience, making our lives easier, always a win whenever you can do that. So where it starts to get a little bit more interesting is our button renderer. So what we're doing is we're in file number 2-button-renderer.tsx. And what we've done in this one, so what's happening is the code from the previous file came with us into this one, and then it also has our changes that we're going to be making as well. So they build on each other, kind of like a snowball type thing. And I've also added the comments. If you forget kind of what we talked about, this is really just for me to remember why I did the things I did and what I wanted to talk about. But if you forget context or anything like that, I've added a fat comment block here at the top of the document so you can kind of remember. So yeah, we added the button renderer. Our button renderer is a function that maps over an array of strings to display a given frame's buttons, and that has a max of 4. So if you're not terribly familiar with programming, that sounded like a bunch of nonsense. Totally okay. All that means is we're going to write some code that takes a collection of strings, regular text data, to inform what our buttons are going to say. That's it. And then we're going to basically what I just said, use the button renderer function to render our meta tags. We're going to render our meta tags just like this here, like it says in the specification. And we'll kind of explore the surrounding code here in just a second. But we're looking at our meta property. We're setting our FC frame button. And then, 1 through 4, again, I'll explain this in just a sec. And then also our content. So what we've done here is our button renderer is another one of these functions like we looked at for the layout. It takes in some information. In this case, it takes in an array or a collection of strings, text data. So our button renderer will take whatever collection of text data and take those items and write them as the text on a button that shows up. That's what this does. That's why it's called button renderer. I try and name stuff in a way that kind of makes sense. What that looks like is this button renderer is actually just going to be a part of our layout. So since JSX, the stuff that kind of looks like HTML kind of is HTML, but not really. The stuff that looks like HTML, since it is just JavaScript functions, we can compose them and kind of embed them in each other. So I'm taking, and if you've ever dealt with React or anything, you're probably familiar with this. But yeah, JSX is awesome. We can take our button renderer here and embed it right here in our layout. So what we can see we're doing here is we're taking the button data. This is what we saw before. The button data in this case is our buttons. It's what's displayed on the face of our buttons, if you want to think about it that way. It's button 1, 2, 3, and 4. So by making this dynamic, just the same way we defined our layout as dynamic with our image URL and post URL, right now, we could go through and make this dynamic as well, but I'm just going to keep it fixed for the moment. But just so you can kind of see how things are composable, we could have each response screen potentially render its own different set of buttons, and that's something that we'll probably look at in the future. But we're just going to keep it simple for right now. Just kind of want to spark your ideas as far as what you could potentially do on your own. But yeah, so this is button 1 through 4 that we're displaying. We're using our button renderer. So what JSX, this HTML, I'm just going to start calling it what it is, JSX. What the JSX is really good at is taking data and taking JavaScript objects and arrays and things like that specifically and allowing you to display them, or in this case, render our meta tags to show up in the frame. So what we're doing here is, like this does require, I got a ping, 1 second.
Yep, that was
Yes.
me. So question, so in that code, so that is the option for 4 buttons, but say I only wanted 2 buttons. Obviously I could just delete the button 3, button 4, but do I have to change anything else? Like
Nope, it's dynamic based on what you pass in. So this is totally valid.
Okay, and right now I believe Frames supports up to 4 buttons. So could you do more? And if you did more, what would happen?
So you can do more, and that's it's not invalid JavaScript to do more, but from what I understand, Warpcaster will only pick up the first 4 FC frame button. It'll only pick up the first 4.
Oh, okay, makes sense.
So yeah, you can totally this piece of it's just this button data right here, as long as it maintains our format, which we've specified our format here, or our type is what it's actually called, is a collection or an array of text data. So we're meeting that requirement here. So anything that's valid text can go in your button. Now, that doesn't mean you can't, there are some additional considerations. Like I'm sure we've all seen, I get to check out Workcast while showing folks stuff. That's pretty neat. I get to hang out on social media. But no, what I want to show you specifically is the trending frames stuff. Is that button not on desktop? Interesting. But we've all seen the buttons. Or can I go /frames? Yeah. Wait, that's frames.js. Interesting. But yeah, I was just trying to show you all how you've seen button text cut off. You just want to keep in mind the fact that you do have a limited amount of space, and it has to display on desktop and mobile. And I think you get a little bit more screen real estate. I wish I could actually find. Oh, here it is. Cool. I guess I'm just so used to that button. But yeah, I maybe that's only on desktop, or maybe that's only on mobile that I'm seeing them cut off so bad. But even more consideration. So yeah, everything actually looks pretty decent. I spend most of my time on Workcaster on my phone, so I'm just really aware of all the cutoff buttons, especially when you have multiple ones next to each other. It doesn't look like it's as much of an issue on desktop though, so that's interesting to know. Responsive design, even in frames. Boo.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah, long.
if you look, Vitalik made if you look at his profile, he made a frame and he was asking like survey poll questions, and his responses for the options were so long that it like cut off and you couldn't read them all.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Thank you for that. So yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, it's him, so he can do whatever he wants. But yeah, totally. This is very unusable. We have no idea. I mean, you can kind of get it from context, but if four is totally cut off, you don't know what it is based on. So this is just in general not a good user experience. So all of that, long and the short of it, is just use concise button names where you can, because otherwise you're going to get cut off and folks won't know what you're doing or what you're trying to get them to do.
Yeah.
Again,
I mean,
just
it's Vitalik, so he could do what he wants and people will figure out the answers. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have that kind of juice, unfortunately, as just regular old developers. So yeah, just give folks something that they can be. I mean, obviously, you can never be 100% sure unless you inspect the code for yourself, but that they don't feel too creeped out about by pressing. So yeah, we'll just run that back. And yeah, that's kind of the gist of it here. We added our button renderer. So yeah, that's what I was talking about here. So this button renderer takes in the collection of strings, and then what it does is we're using a JavaScript array method called map. There are a few really cool JavaScript array methods, like for each is another really good one, but we want to use map because map returns the result inside the parentheses, basically. That might not mean anything right now, and that's fine, but just know we're going over each piece of data, in this case, each collection of text in between each one of these quotes. So it's basically just iterating over. It's moving from the first one to the second one to the third one, and then rendering the information that we're passing in. So on our button data collection, on the map function, we have the contents of the array, and then we have, this is just shorthand, it's called the index. I just call it IDX here. So we have our content, which is the actual button 1, 2, 3, 4 text, and then we have the index, which is like what's the best way to say this? An item's position in the collection, starting from 0. So button 1 is the 0th item. Button number 2 is the first item. Button 3 is the third item, and button it's 0, 1, 2, 3. So yeah, our first item, we just start at 0 because that's how programmers and computers count. So since we know that we start at 0 with our array, we have to take this index here and add 1 to it, because you can't have a button 0. It's just not in the specification that way. Plus, just logically, that doesn't really make sense. 0 isn't really a concept that you have when you actually have something. So we just tell it to add 1 to the index to get it to render properly, because we know we have to have an FC frame button with, based on the specification. Where did it go? Yeah, right here. The FC frame button, let me bump this up. And it says, this actually also answers your question, Bix. So yeah, page may contain 0 to 4 buttons. If more than 1 button is present, they must be in sequence. Oh, interesting. Glad I read the docs here. I didn't realize this, but if the sequence is broken, it's invalid. It actually doesn't say. I thought it was going to say something about more than 5 frames. So I'm assuming it just ignores it. But this is really important. Say if you were rendering your buttons manually if you just had static information that you didn't want to update. Yeah, so you always want your buttons to be in order as well. If they're not ordered correctly, they will not render. So very interesting. So yeah, we're moving through this collection of data, and then what we're having at return is everything inside this parentheses right here, basically just the meta tag, is being returned from this expression. So we have our meta property, or our meta tag with the property. That's kind of dumb to say, and then our FC frame with what order it's going to be, and then the content. And again, the content in this case is this data, button 1, 2, 3, or 4. And how that all kind of fits together, again, we've kind of looked at it starting from the layout and then the button renderer. And the way it all fits together is the button renderer sits inside of the layout, and then the layout gives you your buttons, is how this is set up. This isn't the only way to do it. It's just how we're doing it for right now. So you take your button data, and what this is called passing in props. So you're passing in properties, that's what props is short for. So you're passing in properties, this text information, into your button renderer. It's going through it and then making your buttons, is the long and the short of that. So we've put that functionality into our layout, and it will just kind of live there in perpetuity. But again, you can specify a different layout if you wanted to, and then reuse the same markup. And again, we're actually going to look at that and what that looks like towards the end. But you can specify a brand new layout. You could change the button data, and then you could still render it out. So this is all just set up to be composable, long and the short of it. And yeah, that's how we're rendering our buttons. This isn't the only way to render buttons. From the second session, we were trying to manually do it, which you can do, but having a list of items to move over is always, it's a bit better for consistency. Like we've seen here, this operation, basically, as long as we've not given it incorrect data, it'll always do exactly what it's supposed to do, as long as we keep our commitments to only give it this sort of data right here. So it'll always do exactly what we want it to do. And that's typically why we want to set up something like our button renderer, so we don't have to be down here manually typing in our buttons. It's just going to do it all for us after we specify our array here. And then, yeah, and then that's what gives us our button 1, 2, 3, and 4 here. We're going to look at how we get the different frames to render in the next file. But yeah, that's the buttons, and we actually got them to work this time. This is further than we got last time. Does anyone have any questions?
Is it a thing to have the buttons like different colors or different backgrounds?
No. From what I understand, okay. So another client could do that, because this is a standard that they've opened up and published, and I think some of the other clients have integrated frames as well, so they could do it, but it's not in the specification, so it's going to be up to the client that you're looking at it.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then, so now we're going to make our buttons interactive. So this part's going to be a little bit more meaty. It's going to cover how that part that I also couldn't figure out last time, which was, how does this all work? What data gets passed around? How do you know which buttons to render or which frame to render? How do you know which frame to render based on what's coming through? All of that, all of those questions I had last time that I figured out like 20 minutes after we got done. So this is our adding interactivity. What we're going to do is add a route handler. And what a route handler is, it's just going to scroll here a little bit. Don't mind the code too much. But yeah, our app.get, this is our app renderer, or I'm sorry, our handler. So our app handler. So what this does is it allows us to specify our routes. The slash is understood to be the home or the root route. So if you were to go to google.com without any slashes after .com or anything like that, that's the root route, your home page, if you want to think about it that way. So we're going to add our handler to deal with Warpcast sending it back to us. So if you'll remember, we specified our post URL as a part of our layout. I've also done a little bit of an update here where we specify a default endpoint if for some reason the component doesn't specify one. So that's what we were talking about here. We've made a few updates to our layout. We've made button data an optional property. So we were talking about how different layouts could have their own buttons. Well, that's possible now. The post URL is optional because it's optional in the standard. Buttons are also optional. As we looked at in our very first session, the most basic bare minimum requirement for a frame is the static tags that we looked at here and our image information. So our frame name, isn't really going to change from the initial render. I mean, I guess you could if you really wanted to, but it's not going to be displayed. So it doesn't really matter. It embeds whatever it picks up on that first frame. So it doesn't really matter. So our layout's been updated to also allow us to not specify a post URL and to fall back to our endpoint that we specified, and then also have the button data be dynamic or the default button data. We've renamed it here to better express what it does. So this is still the button 1, 2, 3, 4 that we've seen, and this will continue to be used in our case. But you can specify your button renderer now with either this dynamic data or the default button data that we're kind of building in here. If for some reason you use the layout and didn't want to pass in the end, which we do that here as well. So the part that was really confusing, at least to me last time, or that was not obvious, I guess those are the same thing, is how was I figuring out how to respond to these button presses? What was going on, kind of behind the scenes? How should I be building my logic, everything like that. So whenever we click a button, we've looked at this before, but whenever we click a button, let me pop my developer console here. I'm a little too large. So whenever I've totally massacred this page. There we go. Drag it out a little bit. So whenever we click a button, you go network tab, cool. Click a button, it's going to send off that fake cast that we've seen before. I may have to really touch too much. So yeah, we have the fake cast that it sends off, and we look at the data that it's sending us. This is basically this is our frame responding and telling it where to go, which is that res, the railway.app/res. It knows which they call it the frame action index, but that's whichever button that we hit. Same thing there is going to be index. Oh, they actually start from 1. That's interesting. They start counting from 1. So, but that makes sense. Their buttons start from 1. You can't have a 0 with buttons, so that makes sense. But anyway, so they send to us this information of which button we pressed, what our endpoint is, and then what actually comes into our endpoint. Frame debug. No. Okay, interesting. So I'm just kind of peeking behind the curtain here and looking at what it's looking at. This is basically how the frames are rendered. It reaches out to the frame and then grabs this information, but that's not super important. We just wanted to see that it was actually reaching out to our endpoint based on what we specified in the initial layout, which it is. Back down to our layout here. So yeah, we take in the dynamic post URL, or we specify a default one. That way the frame functions regardless. So what happens is whenever you hit that button, Warpcast is making a request to our backend that we've looked at before on Railway. It's making that request. It's actually sending some data through in a specific shape. What I mean by a specific shape is that it has an agreed upon format. So what's coming through is a JSON object that has 2 properties. It has untrusted data. This means, so we have this concept of untrusted data and trusted data. It looks like untrusted data is not signed, basically. It's unsigned data. There's no assertions that it hasn't been tampered with, although I reasonably, trust Warpcaster. I think the trusted data, let's actually double check, but the trusted data is basically signed. Signed with a given user's wallet. Trusted data.
Is there some like an option that you should always be looking out for, like only ever use trusted data, or?
I think it depends on what you were doing. In our context, it's not going to be super important that we verify the integrity of this information. But let's scroll down here and see what it says. Yeah, the signed message can be validated by calling the validate message API on hubs, which we could do that if we wanted to add some additional interactivity or verify any of this information. So let's say we were going to mint something to someone's wallet. We would probably want to do this. That way we can make sure the request hasn't been tampered with. That's basically what we're doing here. They're saying that this trusted data, whatever the result of it is verified, and don't have to worry about it being tampered with, basically. So yeah, it looks like we would have to do an external call to an API on hubs, assuming it's in full sync. So, but we can take this message hash here. That's probably what it is. Yeah, signed message. So we can take this, if we were to call this API, and we can just kind of think through it here. If we were to call this API, we could verify the signer. We can verify the message that it's correct. Basically, it just it allows us to cryptographically verify that this data that's being sent is actually valid. Because something could happen along the way. It does kind of seem, maybe unnecessary in this context, but you do want to be sure if you're gonna, mint something to someone's wallet, et cetera, you would want to be reasonably sure that it is them who's communicating with you, I think. So yeah, this is the information that our API is getting whenever we click one of the buttons. It's going to pass in your FID, the URL that you came from, the message hash, the timestamp. And this is all useful information, but what we're really, and input text, but we haven't looked at that yet. What we're really interested in here is the button index. And as we saw there, the button index starts from 1 and goes to 4, just like the specification. Makes perfect sense. So what do we do with that? We know that our server, our app here that we're looking at, is going to get some information that matches this format, but that doesn't really tell us anything like what do we do with these button indexes, how do we show different stuff, things like that. So if we roll down here, again, this is going to be some more like basic JavaScript stuff, but let me just walk you through it, and we can talk about answer questions kind of towards the end of this little section right here. So what we're wanting to do, this is some pretty like kind of web standard stuff. What we're wanting to do here is what's going on the right hand side is what's important is we want to get the JSON, this data that we're talking about up at the top. We want to get this information from the request. So that's what we're doing right here. We are, it's a promise, so we have to await it. And we're trying to get the JSON that was sent over to us from Warpcaster. There may be an error on our end or theirs. So what we want to do is we're working with the untrusted data because we're using the button index exclusively. Basically, there's nothing else that we're using except the button index. So I don't really care about anything else. So if we don't have the button index, we want to throw an error. This is a HTTP error. 400 errors. There's different series of errors if you want to think about them. There's a 100, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I think 5 is it. But 400 in this case means a user, a 400 error basically just means an invalid request. So that means we're going to throw an error and with a message of the frame data is missing. So for some reason, Warpcaster didn't send us the untrusted data, and that untrusted data didn't have the button index property, because that's all we really care about. We're going to throw an error. We cannot continue with the operation of our program if this doesn't exist. So that's what throwing an error does. Basically, it says, hey, I'm done. You don't have this piece of information I need to work. I quit. So yeah, that's what throw new error does. If you've never seen that in JavaScript, basically it just says, I quit. And here's why. Cool. So we've used this if statement here to check if our button data exists. So I just destructured it here so I didn't have to, type it out. It's actually kind of unnecessary, but so what? So I grabbed the button index, and then based on our comments up here, we know the button index is going to be a number. I guess that's not terribly obvious, but JSON supports some basic data types like strings, booleans, numbers, probably some other stuff, arrays and objects. So yeah, we're interested in the button index, which is a number that we're going to get. So yeah, we have our number, and then we're doing a switch. So a switch, if you're unfamiliar, because it seems like switch has gone out of style for some reason, but a switch is basically a bunch of if-else statements, but structured a lot better. I mean, there are some functional differences too that you have to be aware of, but if you have a piece of data that you want to check multiple cases of, not just one, like we're checking a single thing right here. We're checking if our button index exists, which is fine. That's what we want to do. But we want to check that button index, since it can exist in 4 different states, 1, 2, 3, or 4. We want to basically do something different. That's what switch means. We want to do something different in the case that the button index is 1. So what we've done there is we're rendering our layout with that image that we specified. And yeah, that's kind of, let me get back over here. So I'm just going to refresh the page, close all that too. Okay, it's back down. Let's see. Grab my frame again. Where do we go? This one. Boom. And refresh. I grab my frame again. This is our default frame. And then, yeah, so now, just to kind of show you here. Boom. So yeah, we can see here, we just copied the image URL from case 1 out of our end result here. I'll go back and update that since it does have a stale link. But yeah, so we hit button number 1, and then we got this image. Hit button number 2, you get the second one, which I wonder if that one's still going. Yoink. Okay, cool. I reckon it's Wednesday, my dudes. I think we started. Oh yeah, we started off on a Wednesday. That actually makes a bunch of sense. So yeah, we can see here. That's what happened whenever we hit button number 2. Button number 3 has a wooden axe. I don't know what I was thinking when I grabbed these images. Yep. The paradox axe. This makes me so angry. The fact that they didn't call it a paradox makes me angrier than the actual axe. I see. People put anything on the internet. So that's what happens when you hit button 3, and button 4 is distressed looking SpongeBob. Interesting. But yeah, that's just showing, sorry, long and the short of it, that just, as I have suspected, you are full of bacteria. We're going to have to throw you away. Oh no. But yeah, that just shows that we can respond. What we've done there is respond with a new frame that has this layout where we've specified what we want the frame image to be. And because we're using this layout, we get the default. We didn't specify a button renderer, but we don't have to, or we didn't specify the button data, excuse me. Button renderer is built in. So we didn't specify the button data, so it's going to continue to give us those basic default buttons that we have here, default button data, because we didn't pass anything in. So we get that on our frame, just kind of built in because of us building the component the way that we did. It's going to take that and just do everything like it normally would. It's basically just rendering static frames each time right now. So yeah, you hit case 1, you get that first image. If you click that second button, case 2, you get the second one. And we can respond to each button press with a different piece of information now. So, well, not piece of information, different image now. And then if for some reason, this is just kind of a correctness thing, but switch cases have a default case. If for some reason, something would have to be really wrong for this to all happen. Warpcaster's API would have to be wrong. A lot of stuff here. If we got an option other than 1, 2, 3, or 4 from Warpcaster, we still want to handle that gracefully. We're only specifying logic on the cases we're expecting. So we should, in theory, only get 1 through 4. Excuse me. But if we got something other than 1 through 4, we're also accounting for that as well. So we can basically just handle it. It's not really error handling, it's just kind of accounting for an edge case that we didn't think of.
I have a question. So those are all
Sure.
JPEGs. Can you use a PNG or an SVG as well, or does it have to be JPEG?
That's an excellent question. So, SVG, where are we at? So here are the image spec information from Forecaster. I'll just drop this in there. There we go. So the frame specification can be any image under, or excuse me, can't be any image. It has to be an image of size less than 10 megabytes. It can be a JPEG, PNG, or a GIF.
Oh, okay. So no SVGs.
Correct. And they actually specify why here. SVG images can contain scripts. You can actually specify a script tag inside of an SVG because we looked inside of an SVG. I thought it was for a different reason, but yeah, SVG files can have scripts in them, and you don't want to be scrolling your feed and someone could have a script arbitrarily execute or something along those lines. So this makes sense. But you can get some animation in there with a GIF, so that's pretty cool. But yeah, JPEG, PNG, and you might want to watch out. It looks like they've specified JPG file extension. Some weirdos might have a JPEG, like an actual JPEG, the word spelled out file extension. I wonder if it cares there. Maybe we can test it and find out. But yeah, so those three, I like GIF, and they give you a pretty decent size too, so that's neat. Maybe I'll put a GIF on one of them and see what happens. But yeah, those are the image types.
And then also, if you go back to the code, let me see. It says like the hyperlink is i.imgur, so that's where it's being stored. But does that matter? And could you use like mobile or upload.io or some other hosting platform, or does it have to be that imgur?
Oh, image? No, it doesn't have to be Imager. This can be anything that resolves to an image.
Okay.
That Workcaster servers could reach, basically. So it couldn't be like a file on your local. Well, while you were developing on your computer, it could be a file on your local machine. But if you didn't upload that file to the internet somewhere, you couldn't, basically.
Okay, that makes sense.
Oh, and I realized I just answered my own question here. We have the JPEG file extensions on a few of these, and it doesn't care. So it takes both. I didn't even realize that.
Okay, perfect.
Nice. Yeah. So yeah, anywhere, any image on the internet. Should you use any image? Because basically they also consider the correctness of your frame, if you will. Or I guess they've taken that off. They were having something about the aspect ratio being incorrect. Like that was a knock against your frame or something like that initially.
Oh, okay.
But it looks like that's been resolved. Typically, you do want your Open Graph metadata images to be the 1.19 to 1 ratio. Yeah, it looks like they removed it, which I think is fine. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But yeah, they do specify a ratio of 1.91. Yeah. Just because of the way the cards are rendered and how Open Graph renders them, they're keeping the same aspect ratio that they are, but it looks like they've also given a square option as well. I think that they rolled out an aspect image property. So let's have a look at that too. But yeah, so you want it to be like the same. If you're following guidance for like social posts or like getting your web page to show up correctly on social, you'll get these kind of recommendations. And I think it's like 1200 by 636 is the actual like recommendation as far as image specs. But they're saying as long as it meets this ratio, it'll render properly on Workcast at least. Well, actually, this is the spec, so this is what all clients should do. So yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
And yeah, that's it. So basically, we started out with just kind of recap. We started out with the end result of our first session, where we had a really awesome but basic frame that didn't do anything but show an image. We had to get in here and manually manipulate the text. If we, deleted the wrong character, it would be gone. And then, yeah, where we ended up at. We now have better developer experience. We can write something looking similar to HTML. We can get in here and compose our elements together. I didn't really cover this because it's TypeScript specific and it doesn't really matter for you. But if you're interested, basically what I did was I specified the data type that we were going to get back from Farcaster, Warpcaster, whatever. That's what it told us that it was going to give us in the specification, the untrusted data. And that's what I cared about. So what I did was, this is really an aside. This is not frame specific in any way. This is just TypeScript. I defined a type and called it frame data response, or res for short. And this is just, I trust Warpcaster to always, well, not always, but at least for now, give me the data in this shape. So this just allows for us to get some better code completion. It allows us to make sure we're not doing anything weird on our switch cases for our button indexes or indices, excuse me. And it has all the other information because we don't care about it right now, but we might in the future. So we just took into account the whole untrusted frame data that's being sent back and kind of define that as a type, just so we can get better autocomplete and stuff like that from our editor. So that's just some TypeScript information. But yeah, so we got our button renderer here that we pass in our basic information, the collection of strings, our layout that now, back to main actually, our layout that now allows folks to specify their post URL and their button data optionally, but we fall back to our defaults if they don't. And yeah, now we're actually responding to whenever someone clicks a frame button. So yeah, we went from fully static to being able to respond to button clicks, respond with those components that we built up to display. And then, yeah, responding with a dynamic and different response for each button click.
Yeah, that's awesome. Making headway. I love it.
Yes. And we got about 15 more minutes. So we can kind of mess around here if we want to kind of look at some other, some of the stuff we kind of talked at the beginning. But yeah, any questions, any errors on your screen, anything like that?
No.
Cool.
So what would be, okay, so we have, I'm just thinking of like all the different frames because yeah, it's been like an absolute like tornado of just people like heads down, hacking, grinding, creating all sorts of frames. So I'm just trying to think like what have we seen so far? Like we've seen, like NFT mints, we've seen galleries, we've seen polls, we've seen just like a static image, like e-commerce. It can there be music or no?
You can only frames can only have buttons and static images and text input.
Okay. So
well, I guess not static images; they can have GIFs. But yeah, just that information we reviewed just a second ago.
Yep. Okay. So no audio yet, though.
That would be terrible. I don't want. I mean, I guess you could do like the whole tap to play thing, but I certainly wouldn't want it to just play.
No, that's true. That's true. So then, if you wanted to do like an NFT mint through a frame, is that literally just a case of clicking, having one of your buttons be the mint button?
Yes. So I can kind of pseudocode that for you a little bit. So let's say, I'll just do like that. Here. There we go. So yeah, in the case of an NFT mint, let's say we had, Well, I would call a contract. I mean, I'm just actually thinking about how I go through. So I take VM, and then what I would do is call contract or call mint function. That mint function would send it to, all right, so let's just assume we're going to trust Farcaster here. So what we would need to do is take their FID. That's actually before this. So first thing we need to do is resolve the FID. So resolve FID. You do that. Resolve the FID via the Hub's API. That's step one. So now you know what your wallet or which wallet is connected to a given FID.
Yep.
Just go back down here. So yeah, resolve the FID from the Hub's API. So I'm gonna contract. Then I want to call the mint function to the address I'm very bad spelling, specified in the, or we'll say provided from Hub API, because we're going to take that FID and map it to a wallet address. Then we would call the contract. I think you said you use like APIs and stuff like that, or maybe some no code options, but I'm just kind of working through what that would look like here.
Yep.
So we would call the contract's mint function. We would mint it to the address provided from the Hub API. And that's it. I mean, you just have to do this little two-step here of resolving the FID and then calling your contract mint function, which you would do in something like VM or WAGMI or however you're set up.
Oh, okay, perfect.
And where this would actually go, I think, is somewhere on one of your button clicks, to your point. It would go in one of these case options right here. So, yeah, that's just a comment, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah. So yeah, let's just say somebody clicked your button 4. Upon them clicking button 4, you'd make that request to the Hub's API, get their wallet address, call the contract mint function, and then mint to that to the FID or the wallet address that you matched up from the FID.
Okay, that makes sense. So, I mean, this might be getting too crazy. I don't know if you saw the one frame that this girl did where it was an NFT, but it was based on your FID number and your like profile pic. I mean, that's probably a whole different lesson, but yeah, it like based on whatever your profile was, it created this like artwork. So it's probably like some generative code inside a frame.
Yeah. So yeah, frames are just kind of a delivery method at the end of the day. You can do any sort, to your point, you can do any sort of business logic or anything like that in the back end. You would do it, somewhere inside. If you're thinking about it from our case, you would do that, somewhere in here. Like they hit button 2. All right, well, if you hit button 2, I'm gonna call the contracts and then do all your business logic basically in this portion. And you can do anything that you can do on a server here.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
So yeah, we're one lesson behind where I wanted to be. We can look at more dynamic stuff, and we're going to look at the dynamic images and things like that, because we don't have to you kind of have to understand what's going on for it to really make sense. But we can generate a static image at request time to serve the user instead of these already uploaded images. We can actually assemble our own images to return back. That's like you said, Vix, with the one for Vitalik. These are dynamically generated images. So if you want to look at this, actually, it's a pretty good example case. So what's going on here is I don't really meet any of these, so I'm just going to spam it. Other reason. So what's happening is they're clicking that button. It's going to their endpoint. It's going to their endpoint or his endpoint, and then he's doing some logic and then generating this image based on the information that's either in the database or wherever it's at. So we can have responses be dynamic. We just have to, whenever Farcaster asks us, we have to give them back this static image, but we can make the data and the information inside the image dynamic.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.